Hello, everyone. Hi, friends. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Renge Kyo. Part two. um, since I went through all my dialogue about why I'm doing this and so on and so forth in part one, I don't have to do it for the next parts, however many there are. So we're going to jump right into it, okay? So I left off, even though I jumped forward a little bit yesterday. Um, yeah, I left off where the confusion of teachings and how um, certain personal theories were pushed into the Buddhist teachings to kind of stray from the core meanings of the teaching. And because they were extant for a long period of time, I've already done videos on how Buddhism traveled from North India to South India and off into the island, or actually they would be insulted to be called an island, I guess, but Burma and so forth. Um, Long time periods between the travel of newer teachings in the time period of Shakyamuni's lifetime. So the result is a lot of early teachings were practiced over more than one generation, and people became convinced that what they were learning and what they were taught was it. So if somebody came along with new stuff, they treated it with a lot of suspicion, and in some cases, um, just disregarded it altogether. So that was a problem in the propagation of Shakyamuni's teachings in his day. Today, we think it, and it's already across the world in various media, right? Okay, so we continue with Nichiren's writing on the Tripitaka master Shan Wu Wei. He began to question one by one the doctrines upheld by. Now, he's talking about himself now, and he does this a lot, Nichiren, where he puts himself in the third person. He often uses the question and answer format in a invented discussion with others that really are both him. So he's having he's using this as a teaching tool because a lot of times when you have a lot of people that you're trying to teach or disseminate information to, you need them to interact and ask you questions. And, if you're exiled on an island or if you have just a small group near you, but you're trying to provide a writing that maintains a position that anyone can access, you kind of have to force the questions. And since they're not there, you, with some wisdom, invent questions out of familiarity with the people of your time and so on and so forth, and your own intellectual questions. And then you answer them in the hopes that whatever question you invent, somebody out there will have something similar to ask and won't have to go through the difficulties, whatever they might be, in asking that questions. You know what I'm talking about, so let's move on. But then, with the arrival of the latter age, there appeared one wiser than the scholars and teachers whom the people of the time followed. This is where he introduces himself. And he already positions himself as a reformer just in that sentence, right? He says the current teachers that are being followed, the current authorities, remember authoritarianship, that people are following and want to follow because they like to be told what to do. This guy comes along and he's much wiser, in possession of much deeper scholarship than these people of his day. Even though they were talking Buddhism, they weren't talking the correct meaning. They were confusing what is important and what isn't as important. So he comes along, and Nichiren studied all over the place from a very young age of 11 or 12 when he first went off. But he had the privilege of traveling to many temples and being exposed to many of the Kumarajiva translations, Nagarjuna translations, and so on and so forth. So there were many aspects of scholarship that he was exposed to at a young age, and he thought deeply about how these are connected and how they're not connected, and so on. So he, Nichiren, began to question one by one the doctrines upheld by the early scholars and teachers, and to criticize them, pointing out that they differed from the sutras on which they were based. Or he clarified solely in the light of the various sutras that, in formulating their doctrines, the scholars and teachers had failed to distinguish which sutras had been preached early in the Buddha's teaching life and which later, as well as which were shallow and which were profound. Thus attacked, the adherents of these doctrines found themselves unable to defend the erroneous teachings of the founders of their various schools, and were at a loss to answer. Now, this is part of the scholarship, and I don't think it's any accident that this scholarship originated in China and spilled over into Japan, because both those countries' cultures are very meticulous, pay attention to minutia, but they're also human, so they make the mistakes he's accusing them of even though they may have great arguments for the way they teach or what they teach, some of them have been unduly influenced by mistakes from previous scholars and fail to question them or just don't understand them, and so they just repeat them. Ouch. So this is what Nichiren's doing in his lifetime. He's been studying all over the place, including China and all over. China's a huge continent. And he's starting to point out these mistakes. Hey, and now what we're talking about is when these people are questioned. And another point I wanted to make about scholarship is that they had lively debates. If a Nichiren shows up and says, you're wrong, this is where you strayed, that was taught before this, that's why that doesn't make sense. If you put it in the right order, now you start to understand what's really supposed to be happening here. They couldn't just say that without backing it up. And so this is where we're going to get into here, is in a lot of debates, and many of them that Nichiren participated in, his logical arguments, though it wasn't his goal to offend anyone, but he took a position of offense because this was the most valuable teaching in human life, that when people got it egregiously wrong, he simply had to take it apart and redirect it and fix it. And so he put a lot of energy into that, and pissed off a lot of people. But when you hear what their excuses are, you'll see Nietzsche's kind of justified in being a bit upset. But he didn't use his temper or insults to win arguments. He used the logic of the sutras themselves, just pointed it out, and then said, how do you answer that? So he won a tremendous amount of debates, which created quite a reputation, right? So thus attacked the adherents, and were at a loss on how to answer. Some, in their doubt, declared that the scholars and teachers must surely have had their passages of proof in their sutras and treatises, but that they themselves, lacking the requisite wisdom, could not defend these doctrines effectively. Now, isn't that a classic authoritarian? This is a leader who's teaching untold amounts of people incorrectly, and because that person, usually a man, was so convinced in what he was teaching, didn't want to admit that he'd be talking out of his butt, that he cites his earlier scholars and teachers who passed this teaching down to him. Well, they must know what they were talking about, and they must have good arguments for this. I'm just not wise enough yet to be able to defend this. um, God, that sounds like a teenager's justification for getting an F, doesn't it? Anyway, uh, that's an authoritarian right there. I'm doing what I'm told. I don't question it, right? By 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 implication, I don't question my teachers because they're the authorities. You don't question me. I'm the student. I do what I'm told. Classic authoritarian. Do you understand? Okay. Um, Others also doubtful. Doubtful of what? See, nobody wants to admit, oh, you're right. I was wrong. Thank you so much. Now that's proper that's respect. That's intelligence. That's what humans are capable of. But all of these are authoritarian. It has to do, I'm sure, with the cultural environment they grew up in under dictators, authoritarianship. That's the history of China, right? And Japan with the emperor and that whole thing. So Nichiren was fighting some pretty big forces, not just in Buddhism, but just the way he challenged things made him a target for a lot of leadership, right? Others, also doubtful, decided that while their teachers had been worthies and learned persons of antiquity, they themselves were ignorant people of the latter age. In this way, they convinced persons of virtue or rank to ally with them and totally oppose the one who challenged their belief. Nichiren's the guy in the crowd saying, hey, the emperor's naked. You know the story of the emperor's new clothes? Nichiren's going, I ain't playing that. That's baloney. And, so the 999 or 99% of the people surrounding Nichiren are like, what you talking about, Willis? Right? Okay. Some of you may not get that reference, but that's okay. In this way, they convinced others. Okay. But I, Nichiren, have discarded prejudice, whether against the opinions of others or in favor of my own. In other words, I'm not being arrogant about this. I'm using the sutras themselves to go, and set aside the views propounded by scholars and teachers. Instead, relying solely on the passages of the sutras themselves, I have come to understand that the Lotus Sutra deserves to occupy first place. I'm sure that's not how he said it, but primacy. If there are those who assert that some other sutra surpasses the Lotus Sutra, we must suppose it is for one or another of the following reasons. This is why they're misguided. First, they may have been deceived by passages in other scriptures that resemble those of the Lotus Sutra, or they may have been deceived by sutras that have been fabricated by persons of later times and passed off as the words of the Buddha. Unfortunately, there is a considerable amount of evidence for that. Lacking the wisdom to distinguish true from false, they may have consequently accepted such texts as the Buddha's actual words. Well, yeah, that's a tough one, right? Beginning with Huineng and his Platform Sutra, or Shan Tao with his Teaching on Meditation Sutra, there have been numerous false teachers in India, China, and Japan who have simply made up their own sutras and preached them to the world. Now he's naming names. Remember, the era he lived in was ruled by shogunate samurais, life committed assassins. I'm going to say it. Nichiren had quijones. Okay. In addition, there are many others who have made up what they claim to be scriptural passages, or who have inserted their own words into passages of the scriptures. Okay, so when I say this stuff, I'm reading this right off of Nichiren's writings. I'm not making it up. I'm reading it verbatim, okay? Unfortunately, there are ignorant people who accept these spurious texts as genuine. They are like a sightless person who, if told that there are stars in the sky that shine more brightly than the sun or moon, will accept that assertion as fact. When someone says that his or her own teacher was a worthy or wise person of ages past, while Nichiren is a mere foolish man of the latter age, the ignorant will tend to agree. Yeah, we know that's kind of a weird human nature, and I think I'm going to repeat myself, but authoritarians are more likely to doubt their own friends and scholarship around them. Look at our world today, especially in the United States. There's a complete, not just disdain, but disdain to the point of anger and animosity toward anything that smacks of intellect. That to me is just mind-boggling. As somebody who really appreciates study and deep learning and teaching myself greater clarity in this samsaric life, it's a profound tool to help me create that same clarity in my Buddha mind, or not to create it in the Buddha mind because it's already there, but my road to discovery of its innateness in me is greatly assisted by the explosions of myth and unreal um, attachments. If I'm attached to anything, is to get to the Buddha mind, and for me, rather than being, because I could easily just be a disciple, right, and just learn, and gain a lot of aha moments like Pratyeka Buddha, the learning and realization, right? But what do we know from Nichiren about learning and realization? They are people of incorrigible disbelief. I have managed with actually my whole life's been that way, but I think Buddhism has allowed me to really clarify for myself that as I started as a skeptic, somebody of incorrigible disbelief, I lessened my attachment to skepticism and realized that my energies were much more gratified by the pursuit of knowledge within the Buddhist framework. In other frameworks, when you dig for knowledge, things explode very easily. You get to a point where you go, this is a bunch of crap. And that's very disappointing, and it reinforces our human nature of skepticism, because we have to have, some of us more than others, real concrete experiential evidence that says, okay, this is for real. This does something. This changes the way I see things. This is real. And that's what brings us joy and comfort and security. But that's the mindset of a disciple or a Pratyeka Buddha, even in our hot, is working hard on the self to achieve something. So it can make you very, very much attached to the idea of self, right? Of the duality of self and other. And I'm very aware of this as I study more and more, but I find that I can use that study and my aha moments to help me let go of those attachments. Hopefully I'm not fooling myself, but I truly want to practice the Bodhisattva way, not just letting go of the duality, but as I'm doing now, talking to you, I'm very hard on myself, not just because there is a tendency in me that says, heck with everything. I'm just going to sit in my box and get there. But I find that that leads to a lack of enthusiasm. What I love most about Buddhist study is the inspiration it provides, the constant just appreciation I develop for this kind of thinking, how my mind works, what's going on in here, and why can't I just erase all that and just see my Buddha mind? Okay, for some of you maybe just chanting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo is doing it, and I'm kind of envious of you. Okay, but I think we live in a very authoritarian world today, and there's a tremendous amount of attachment that needs to be identified firstly, and then let go of. So that makes practice of Buddhism very difficult in this time, and even Shakyamuni Buddha talked about this time as being exactly that way. So all of that knowledge that I've accrued is what motivates me to create videos, to go on Quora, regardless of the occasional troll. Those people are just in search, as I am. And posting things on Facebook and anyway, my presence on the internet and these videos is all motivated by trying at my best to be a bodhisattva. And now I'm starting to talk like I did in the first part of the video, so I'm going to get back to this. This is by no means the first time that doubts of this kind have been raised. In the time of the Chen and Sui dynasties, from 557 to 618 in China, there was a lowly priest called Qi Yi, who later became teacher to the emperors of two dynasties and was honored with the title Great Teacher Chen Dai Qi Che. Before he rose to honor, this man not only refuted the doctrines of the various Tripitaka masters and teachers who had lived in China in the preceding 500 years or more, but he also refuted those of the scholars who had taught in India over the course of 1,000 years. As a result, the wise men of northern and southern China rose up like clouds in opposition, while the worthies and learned persons from the east and west came forth like ranks of stars. Criticisms fell on him like rain, while his doctrines were attacked as though by strong winds. Yet in the end, he succeeded in refuting the one-sided and erroneous doctrines of the scholars and teachers and established the correct doctrines of the Tentai school. Likewise in Japan, during the reign of Emperor Kamu, there was a humble priest named Saicho, who later was honored with the title of the great teacher Dengyo. He refuted the doctrines that had been taught by the Buddhist teachers of the various schools in Japan during the 200 and some years following the introduction of Buddhism in the reign of Emperor Kimei. At first, people were infuriated with him, but later they all joined in becoming his disciples. These people had criticized Hyundai and Dengyo by saying the founders of our schools were scholars of the four ranks of sages and worthies and learned persons of antiquity, while you are no more than an ordinary foolish man of the end of the middle day of the law. So he's showing that this is a pattern. By the way, you may notice when he says refuting of the last 1,000 years, he's talking about the beloved Theravada and Hinayana practices that still exist even today. The question, however, is not whether one lives in the former, the middle, or the latter day of the law, but whether one bases oneself upon the text of the true sutra. Again, the point is not who preaches a doctrine, but whether it accords with the truth. The non-Buddhists criticize the Buddha, saying, "You are a foolish man living at the end of the kalpa of formation and the beginning of the kalpa of continuance," while the original teachers of our doctrines were wise men of ancient times, the two deities and the three ascetics, In the end, however, all the 95 non-Buddhist schools were discarded. And yet, in Shakyamuni's own writings, he says, study those too, because you need to know their false arguments. It's helpful for you to understand the true arguments, right? On considering the 8 schools of Buddhism, I, Nichiren, had discovered the following. And I already have a series of videos on the errors in 8 schools. So please refer to that. I'm not going to go into all that right now. Aren't you happy? I, Nichiren, have discovered the following. The Dharma characteristics, the flower garland, and 3 treatises schools, which are based upon provisional sutras, declare that the provisional sutras are equal to the true sutra, or even that the true sutra is inferior to the provisional sutras. These are obviously errors originating with the scholars and teachers who founded these schools. The Dharma Analysis Treasury and Establishment of Truth schools are a special case, while the Precept school represent the very lowest level of the Hinayana teachings. I'm laughing because it seems like throughout all the Mahayana sutras that I've read, there's always some reference to bad Hinayana. I can see why they get tired of hearing it, but they need to change their ways. Anyway, scholars surpass ordinary teachers, and the true Mahayana Sutra surpasses the provisional Mahayana Sutras. Thus, the Mahavairochana Sutra of the True Word School cannot equal the Flower Garland Sutra, much less the Nirvana and Lotus Sutras. Yet, when the Tripitaka master Shan Wu Wei came to judge the relative merits of the Flower Garland, Lotus, and Mahavairochana Sutras, he erred in his interpretation by declaring that though the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavairochana Sutra are equal in terms of principle, the latter is superior in terms of practice. Ever since that time, the True Word followers have arrogantly asserted that the Lotus Sutra cannot even compare to the Flower Garland Sutra, much less to the True Word Sutras, or that because it fails to mention mudras and mantras, the Lotus Sutra cannot begin to compete with the Mahavairochana Sutra. Or they point out that many of the teachers and patriarchs of the Tendai school have acknowledged the superiority of the True Word school, and that popular opinion likewise holds the True Word to be superior. Now, I'm only going to intervene in that statement a little bit, but it goes back to, excuse me, throat's dry today. When I started the Lotus Sutra series of videos, I pointed out that the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which I read from extensively, and then the Surangama, and I may have mentioned other sutras, they are appealing, again, to an authoritarian mindset, but be that as may. Those sutras actually spend a lot more time, Shakyamuni spent a lot more time instructing, telling us how to meditate, what to meditate, what to work to perceive, what to pragmatically understand how to practice, why to practice, what the goal is, where the mind is, where describing what's sometimes called the 2 minds of Buddhism, that samsaric mind and the Buddha mind, that fundamentally is a constant, but over or clouded by this samsarically conditioned mind of attachments, right? And how to separate them, sift through them. Anyway, my point is that, especially for students, disciples, like we all are students, but to the degree that we dig down deep to figure something out, some of us are more or less motivated. But enough said that an instructional teaching seems to have more merit if you're trying to learn. And the Lotus Sutra has some big revelations in it, but it's not really instructional. It's more of a statement about all of these previous years of instruction and how to bring them now to fruition fully, which is philosophically why the Lotus Sutra is at the top and holds such great importance for its revelations as well as its capping off of, okay, you got your diploma now, off into the world of Bodhisattva Way, right? Bodhisattva practice. And so even to this day, a lot of teachers fail to understand this profound aspect of the Lotus Sutra, and they'll just blindly follow it because, they follow Nichiren, and Nichiren said, this is the book. And they'll do a lot of musings, but most of their musings come from Nichiren's writings rather than investigating the book and the teaching he's talking about. So there's already a dissonance there. Not that Nichiren wasn't a good teacher, but I mean, the whole reason I do these videos is because if that's all you teach or learn or hear is an encompassing capping of the teachings, and you never learn the teachings, you can't ascribe the merit that the Lotus Sutra deserves, because all it does is reference previous teaching. It doesn't offer instruction. It offers motivation, solidarity, a culmination of thought, and adds a couple of zingers in there, so that it makes the earlier teachings just more profound to a factor of what, 100, 10, whatever. But that's the function of the Lotus Sutra. It's kind of the last word, although you could argue the Mahabharata Nirvana Sutra is the last word, because that's the sutra he taught in the last day and a half before he passed away. Entered Nirvana, more accurately. Actually, that's not more accurately. He passed away. All right. So that's an interesting aside, I think, to why, or a justification of sorts, for why the teachers and scholars of Buddhism who didn't really understand and just looked at one portion of things would look at the Lotus Sutra and go, well, this is all fine and good, but it doesn't tell me how to do anything. So they would discount it. They didn't understand fully the merit of the sutra. All right, let's go on. Since so many people hold mistaken opinions on this point, I have examined it in considerable detail. I have outlined my findings in other writings, which I hope you will consult, and I hope that people who seek the way will take advantage of the time while they are alive to learn the truth of the matter and pass it on to others. He's just given us a task. Now, giving us a task and instructing us isn't quite the same, is it? I consider it instruction. I consider it a description of what our Bodhisattva way should be in this time. One should not be intimidated by the fact that so many hold such beliefs, nor does the truth of a belief depend on whether it has been held for a long or short time. The point is simply whether or not it conforms with the text of the scriptures and with reason. And this, he takes straight from Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni said himself, apply reason to your learning. Don't just follow it because the words are pretty or you think I'm something special. Don't, he wasn't self-denigrating. He was just appropriately telling his students, his disciples, and people at large, take what the meaning of what I'm saying and try to dig out that meaning for yourself in your own life. Because this is a teaching about how to live your life to its ultimate potential. So it's about you. So if it doesn't make sense to you, then you need to do something else. Read further or dig into those things you don't understand, because it has to be reasonable. It has to work positively in your life. If you're not getting any results or you're doubtful of the results, then you either need to do more study or you need to move on to something else, because not everyone is going to get this. Not everyone on the planet is going to be Buddhist. And even if they are all Buddhists, not everyone will have the same level of understanding. Okay? In the case of the Pure Land School, the Chinese priests Tan Luan, Tao Chou, and Shan Tao made numerous errors and led a great many people to embrace false views. In Japan, Honen adopted the teaching of these men and not only taught everyone to believe in the Nembutsu, but also attempted to wipe out all other schools in the empire. Because the 3,000 priests of Mount Hei are, as well as the priests of Kofukuji, Todaiji, and the other temples of Nara, indeed all of the 8 schools, strove to put a stop to this, emperor after emperor issued edicts and directives went out from the shogunate, all in an attempt to prevent the spread of this teaching, but in vain. On the contrary, it flourished all the more until the emperor, the retired emperor, and the entire populace came to believe in it. I, Nichiren, am the son of a humble family born along the shore of Kataumi of Tojo in the province of Awa, a person who has neither authority nor virtue. If the censures of the temples of Nara and Mount Hei and the powerful prohibitions of emperors could not put a stop to the Nembutsu teachings, then I wonder what I could do. Nembutsu teachings are worship of Amida Buddha, and you can research that on your own, but it is a false teaching. Amida Buddha never existed, other than an invention, as I've said before, of a certain character of our minds, our behaviors in Shakyamuni's teachings. And somehow his fanciful naming of a certain state of enlightenment or awakening was transformed into something superior to Shakyamuni himself. Anyway, but employing the passages of the sutras as my mirror and the teachings of Tentai, and Dengyo as my compass, I have attacked these teachings for the past 17 years, from the 5th year of the Kencho era, 1253, to the present, the 7th year of the Bunei era, 1270. And, as may be seen by the evidence before one's eyes, the spread of the Nembutsu in Japan has been largely brought to a halt. Even though there are people who do not cease chanting the Nembutsu with their mouths, I believe they have come to realize in their hearts that the Nembutsu is not the path by which to free themselves from the sufferings of birth and death. The Zen school, likewise, is guilty of doctrinal errors. By observing one thing, you can surmise 10,000. I can bring an end to the errors of the true word and all other schools at will. The wisdom of the true word teachers, quote unquote wisdom, and other eminent priests of the present time cannot compare to that of an ox or a horse, and their light, quote unquote, is less than given off by a firefly. I have to say, to the occasional few who accuse me of being non-Buddhist by or contradicting the edict of the Buddha Shakyamuni of not speaking poorly of other Buddhists or sects, uh, Nichiren sure didn't hesitate, and I kind of appreciate his calling out of false views. Um, because I've done that a couple of times for specific organizations, but I believe, like Nichiren, that to correct the path of fraudulent teachers um, is essential to a true practice of Buddhism. Uh, they are, it's like the creationists, they're offensively stupid. They're destroying the good roots of many, many, many other scholars and teachers. They fly in the face of reason. So if it flies in the face of reason, we have a mixed message, don't we? So I think that maybe that discussion probably deserves its own videos. But also, I will say, it's not the job of all of us to do that. Uh, Certainly without sufficient study. I've been doing this over 30 years and I'm still studying. And I restrain myself a lot because you could easily slip into a position where that's all you do and you cease to perfect your own wisdom and your bodhisattva practice. So I understand why it's a slippery slope. I'm just pointing out that Nichiren, they didn't call him a reformer for nothing. He was a great part of his mission, and he awoke a great many Buddhists and created lots of great practices. Um, so, how do you judge that, right? Um, I think he's a more modern scholar than 2,600 years ago, and I think um, the exhortation to reason is a much stronger one throughout all of the sutra. Um, and so that's why I'm so much into the scholarship. To expect anything from them is like placing a bow and arrows in the hands of a dead man, or asking questions of one who is talking in one's sleep. Their hands form the mudra gestures, their mouths repeat the mantras, but their hearts do not understand the principles of Buddhism. In effect, their arrogant minds tower like mountains, and the greed in their hearts is deeper than the seas. And all these mistaken opinions mentioned above have come about because they are confused as to the relative superiority of the various sutras and treatises, and because none of them has corrected the errors originally propounded by the founders of these schools. Persons of wisdom, and I read this yesterday, persons of wisdom should, of course, devote themselves to the study of all the 80,000 doctrines of Buddhism and should become familiar with all the 12 divisions of the scriptures. But ignorant persons living in this latter age of ours, a time of evil and confusion, should discard the so-called difficult to practice way and easy to practice way that the Nembutsu's believers talk of, and devote themselves solely to chanting Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. So basically, he's saying that many of ordinary folk not following a devout religious life. I use that word religion carefully, but not following a devout practice of the Buddhist scholarship. If you're not one of those who's particularly adept at scholarship, not out of laziness, but you're not good at study. You don't. Some people, there are different minds. I read a book a long time ago on the 7 different minds of humans. Some of us learn great just by reading books. We absorb knowledge that way. Others can read an instruction manual to build IKEA furniture, and it doesn't relate to real life and all the parts on the floor. By the same token, other people can look at the parts on the floor and go, oh, and just build it. No instructions needed. Um, our minds, our earthly minds, our samsaric minds, they're built of karma. And if you have karma that doesn't function in the same way as others, you're going to perceive differently. So what Nichiren is saying is, don't be discouraged about attaining enlightenment if you don't understand when you read a sutra and it looks like just, pasta recipe to you, then maybe just chant the essential teaching that the Lotus Sutra basically tells us is Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Myoho Renge Kyo, the 5 characters, represent all of the concepts and teachings ultimately contained in 5 characters that Shakyamuni taught throughout his entire life and is represented in the scholarship afterward. And Namu simply says, I'm going for this. I want this Buddha way. I want this Buddha mind. That's why the Gohonzon and chanting to the Gohonzon is so important. Much more important than walking around and driving and cooking while chanting. Go ahead, chant. It's good. But without the focal point of the Gohonzon, you're losing a critical aspect of the connection. The connection to your Buddha mind, which is innate, is achieved either through great amount of practice and learning and understanding concept, but ultimately for the student, for the scholar, and for the everyday person who study is very difficult for, all of us in the final analysis have to clear the path in our deluded samsaric mind to connect directly with our Buddha nature, our Buddha mind. And that achieves with a trance-like slip from this delusion enforced by chanting to Gohonzon. Because Gohonzon stands with Namu Myoho Renge Kyo right in the center of it, stands for all of the teaching of Buddhism to achieve the Buddha way. And when we chant to it, the chanting, sound, repetition, the thought about repetition, the rhythm, the very act, and then the visual focus on Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, the Myo, the Buddha mind itself. When we focus on that determinedly, we shut down the distractions of our regular mind. They may pop through every now and again, but to a great degree, that repetition, the sound, the vision, the focus, shuts down the interruptions of our samsaric mind. And what happens is we connect directly with the clarity of the Buddha mind. And the more we do that, the more we push away the delusions just by doing that act. That's an active meditation. We chant and focus, and we clear a path through our deluded mind as it subsides and the distinctions and so forth kind of fall away, and we connect literally with our extant Buddha mind. This is why after you chant for a while in one sitting, you will reach a point where you'll kind of feel like you're drugged or something, like you're disconnected from reality a little bit. And a lot of people, myself included, will giggle or just smile. We don't know how to get the smile off our face. We're just like, wow, this is incredible. But slowly our deluded mind creeps back in with distractions. But for a while, to varying degrees, how long you've chanted, how many years you've spent doing it, but did you chant for 20 minutes? Did you chant for an hour? You'll hold on to your Buddha perception, and you'll see things with understanding or clarity that, well, sometimes is shocking. Um, love for others, unattached to that in any way. It becomes love instead of appreciation, because appreciation ties itself kind of to samsaric attachments. But love is like totally unattached, and it can be bewildering. Um, so, yeah, fundamentally, uh, just simply chanting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo is an actual visceral experience of connecting with the Buddha mind. Um, so enough said. That's all you need to do. You don't need to understand all of this stuff. I do. I need to bolster that, because after I've chanted it for a few years, the tendency is you get a lot of benefits early on, a lot of insights, you solve a lot of problems, but then after a while you become a little bit maybe arrogant, or maybe you take things for granted, or maybe you have bigger expectations and you're not seeing them. And instead of blaming yourself, heck, it's much easier to blame this practice, and you can make the mistake of walking away from it. So the way I keep myself from going Tendai, Titan, man, that's the brain, isn't it? Titan, where you walk away from the practice for whatever reason. I keep myself inspired in the practice because I put these goals in front of myself: teaching videos, reading more. All of it feeds my need for justification of whatever I do. I don't know why I need that, but I hope I'm doing something good with it. I hope that it's driven by a Bodhisattva way desire. I don't know why I keep going back to that, but when the sun rises in the eastern sector of the sky, then all the skies over the great continent of Jambudvipa in the south will be illuminated because of the vast light that the sun possesses. But the feeble glow of the firefly can never shed light on the whole nation. One who carries in one's robes a wish-granting jewel can have any desire fulfilled. But mere shards and stones can confer no treasures. The Nembutsu and other practices, Zen included, when compared to the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, are like shards and stones compared to a precious jewel, or like the flicker of a firefly compared to the light of the sun. How can we, whose eyes are dull, ever distinguish the true color of things by mere glow of a firefly? The fact is that the lesser provisional sutras of the Nembutsu, the true word school, are not teachings that enable ordinary people to attain Buddhahood. Our teacher, the thus come one Shakyamuni, in the course of his lifetime of teachings, expounded 80,000 sacred doctrines. He was the first Buddha to appear in this Saha world of ours, which previously had not known any Buddha, and he opened the eyes of all living beings. All other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from east and west, from the lands of the 10 directions, received instruction from Shakyamuni. The period prior to his advent was like the time before the appearance of the sovereigns and emperors of ancient China. When people did not know who their own fathers were and lived like beasts. In the time before Emperor Yao, people knew nothing about the duties to be performed in the 4 seasons and were as ignorant as oxen or horses. In the period before Shakyamuni Buddha appeared in the world, there were no orders of monks and nuns. There were only the 2 categories of men and women. But now we have monks and nuns who are teachers of the true word school and who have decided to look upon the thus come one Mahavarachana as their object of devotion, demoting the thus come one Shakyamuni to an inferior position, or who are believers in the Nembutsu, and who pay honor solely to Amida Buddha, thrusting the thus come one Shakyamuni aside. They are monks and nuns owing to Shakyamuni Buddha, but because of the erroneous teachings handed down from the founders of these various schools, they have been led to behave in this way. There are 3 reasons why the thus come one Shakyamuni rather than any other of the Buddhas has a relationship with all the living beings of this Saha world. First of all, he is the world-honored one, the sovereign of all the living beings of this Saha world. Amida Buddha is not the monarch of this world. In this respect, Shakyamuni Buddha is like the ruler of the country in which we live. We pay respect first of all to the ruler of our own country, and only then do we go on to pay respect to the rulers of other countries. The sun goddess, great Bodhisattva Hachiman, which is a Japanese deity uh, prior to the arrival of the Buddhist teachings, are the original rulers of our country, provisional manifestations of Shakyamuni Buddha, who appeared in the form of local deities. One who turns one's back on these deities cannot become the ruler of this country. Thus, the sun goddess is embodied in the form of a sacred mirror known as Naishi Dokoro, and the imperial messengers are sent to great Bodhisattva Hachiman to report to him and receive his oracle. Shakyamuni, the world-honored one of great enlightenment, is our august sovereign. It is he who is to be regarded as the object of devotion. The second reason is, and you can see by reading this, I'm throwing out a lot of terms that I'm not going to research for you. They're easily looked up in Buddhist dictionaries or Wikipedia or whatever. If you want to know more about Hachiman and these others, go ahead and inform yourself. But I'm more interested in his general statements here to help you understand and how to study and how to place Nichiren's writings in the canon and scholarship of Buddhism. The second reason is that the Thus Come One is the father and mother of all living beings in this Saha world. It is proper that we should first of all pay filial, I never pronounce this word right, filial respect to our father and mother, and only then extend the same kind of respect to the fathers and mothers of other people. We have the example of King Wu of the ancient land of Chou, who carved a wooden image of his deceased father and placed it in a carriage, designated it as the general who would lead his lead his troops into battle. Heaven, moved by such conduct, lent him protection, and thus he succeeded in overthrowing his enemy, Chou, the king of Yin. The ancient ruler Shun grieved because his father had gone blind, shed tears, but when he wiped his hands, wet with those tears on his father's eyes, his father's eyesight was restored. Now Shakyamuni Buddha does the same for all of us living beings, opening our eyes so as to open the door of Buddha wisdom, innate within us. No other Buddha has ever yet opened our eyes in such a way. The third reason is that Shakyamuni is the original teacher of all living beings in the Saha world. He was born in central India as the son of King Suddhodana during the 9th kalpa of decrease in the present wise kalpa, when the lifespan of human beings measured 100 years. He left family life at the age of 19, achieved enlightenment at 30, and and spent the remaining 50 years of his life expounding the sacred teachings. He passed away at the age of 80, leaving behind his relics to provide the means of salvation for all living beings of the former, middle, and latter day of the law. The Thus Come One Amida, the Buddha medicine master, Mahavarachana, and the others, on the other hand, are Buddhas of other lands. They are not world-honored ones of this world of ours. He's taken apart the stories in the sutra, and it's easy to mistake these sentences as indicating real in the sense of human beings. These are all more folkloric, but they're skillful means, if you go back to what that means. They're skillful means of description by Shakyamuni of how to understand the worlds we maintain in our samsaric mind and outside of it. This Saha world